Michael had always considered himself a patient man. He wasn't rich, at least not yet, but he was hardworking and committed to building a future for his family. His business, a small but growing digital marketing firm, had seen its ups and downs. Some months were great, with new clients pouring in, and others felt like a slow death, with leads drying up and bills piling high. Despite this, Michael remained optimistic. His dream was within reach, if only things would stabilize. But as he struggled to keep his business afloat, his wife Emma seemed to live in an entirely different reality. Emma, beautiful and always well put together, didn't work. That had been her choice. After their son Liam was born, she decided to stay home, a decision Michael had supported, though not without reservations. He wanted to be the provider, but he also knew that their financial situation was precarious, especially in the beginning stages of his business. Yet, as time went on, Emma's lifestyle demands began to grow, far beyond what Michael could afford. She had always had a taste for the finer things: designer handbags, sparkling jewelry, and clothes from the most exclusive boutiques. While they were dating, Michael had occasionally spoiled her with these things. But now, with a child and a fledgling business, it was becoming increasingly difficult. Emma didn't seem to understand. She didn't want to wait until the business took off. She wanted everything now. "You know, Jessica just bought a new Chanel bag," she would casually mention, flipping through fashion magazines. "I'm thinking I need something like that for the upcoming dinner party. It's embarrassing to show up in the same old thing every time." Michael, already overwhelmed with stress from work, would bite his tongue. They couldn't afford Chanel bags or fancy dinners. Some nights, he barely made it through his accounts, wondering how they would pay for Liam's school fees and his football lessons, let alone expensive luxuries. But Emma didn't care. Her face would light up every time she saw something new, like a child in a candy store. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Michael came home to find Emma sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. Her eyes sparkled as she turned the screen toward him. "Look at this bracelet," she gushed. "Isn't it stunning? I think I deserve something like this, don't you? It's been ages since you bought me anything nice." Michael stared at the price tag and felt his stomach drop. "Emma, I don't think we can afford that right now," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The business is doing okay, but it's still growing. I'm trying to keep things stable for us." Emma sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Michael, you've been saying that for years. How much longer do we have to wait? I'm tired of living like this, always cutting corners, always settling for less. It's embarrassing." He clenched his jaw, trying to maintain his composure. Emma's words cut deeper than she realized. He was working himself to the bone, trying to give her and Liam the life they deserved, but it was never enough for her. He wanted to explain how difficult things were, how precarious the business really was, but he knew she wouldn't understand. Emma lived in a world of immediate gratification, where waiting wasn't an option. Her impatience had started to seep into every aspect of their relationship. Their once loving marriage was now filled with arguments, always centered around money. And Liam, their 7-year-old son, was caught in the middle, often retreating to his room when tensions rose. Michael found solace in the moments he spent with Liam, especially at his football practices. It was one of the few times he could unwind and forget about work. But lately, even that had been taken from him. Emma had started taking Liam to football practice, insisting that Michael focus on his business. "I'll handle it," she said one day. "You need to concentrate on your clients. Besides, I enjoy watching Liam play." At first, Michael welcomed the offer. It gave him more time to work, and he trusted Emma. But as the weeks went by, he began to notice something odd. Emma, who had never shown much interest in sports, was suddenly spending more time at the football field than necessary. She would leave hours before practice and return long after it ended. When he asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying she had errands to run or needed to grab coffee with the other moms. Her growing absences, paired with her unrelenting demands for more luxury, left Michael feeling uneasy. Emma wasn't the same woman he had married. She had become distant, always distracted by her phone or preoccupied with something that she never shared with him. Even their once close-knit family dinners had grown cold, with Emma often excusing herself to take mysterious phone calls. One night, as Michael lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Emma's demands were increasing, but her affection for him was disappearing. She seemed happier when she was away from him, happier when she was at those football practices, surrounded by people he didn't know. A sense of dread settled in his chest. Something was changing, and for the first time, Michael wondered if Emma's growing dissatisfaction with their life was leading her down a path he wasn't ready to face. Emma had always been the center of attention in any room, but lately, she found herself captivated by someone else, someone new. It wasn't Michael. He had become too predictable, too focused on his struggling business. No, it was someone much more exciting and charismatic. It was Ryan, Coach Ryan, to be exact. Ryan was the head football coach at Liam's school. A man in his late 30s, tall and athletic. Ryan exuded a kind of effortless confidence that drew people in. Unlike Michael, who was constantly stressed about his business, Ryan seemed to have everything together. He drove a sleek, expensive car, dressed impeccably, even for a kid's football practice, and carried himself with the charm of someone who knew exactly how to navigate life. Emma noticed all of it. At first, she had simply admired him from a distance. Every Wednesday and Friday, she would sit on the bleachers while Liam practiced, and Ryan would walk past, greeting all the parents with a smile and a nod. His presence had a magnetic effect on everyone, especially the mothers. Emma had never paid much attention to these kinds of men before, but there was something about Ryan that pulled her in. It didn't take long for him to notice her watching. One day, after Liam's practice had ended, Ryan approached her. He had noticed how involved she was in her son's activities, always there to pick him up and cheer him on. His flattery was subtle but effective. "You're doing a great job with Liam," he said with a smile, his eyes locking onto hers. "He's really improving. You must be proud." Emma smiled back, feeling a rush of excitement. "Thank you. He's been working hard, and he really loves football. I think having you as a coach makes a difference." Ryan chuckled, brushing off the compliment, but clearly enjoying the attention. "Well, he's got a natural talent. We just need to nurture it." The conversation was innocent enough, but there was an undeniable connection between them. Over the next few weeks, their interactions became more frequent. It started with quick chats after practice, but soon, Ryan was lingering longer, engaging Emma in deeper conversations. He spoke about his ambitions, his love for the sport, and his successes in life. To Emma, he was everything Michael wasn't: confident, successful, and carefree. One afternoon, as they talked, Ryan offered Emma something unexpected. "You know," he began casually, "we're hosting a fundraiser for the team next weekend. I'd love for you to come. It's a chance to meet some of the other parents, and maybe I could introduce you to a few people who share your interests." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected a personal invitation. She smiled, trying to play it cool. "That sounds nice. I'd love to come." It wasn't just the allure of the event that drew her in. It was Ryan. She couldn't deny it anymore. There was something about him that made her feel alive again, something she hadn't felt in a long time with Michael. As the days went on, Emma found herself thinking about Ryan more and more. She began dressing up just a little more whenever she dropped Liam off at practice. Michael noticed but didn't say anything, brushing it off as Emma's usual attention to her appearance. But there was more to it. Emma wanted Ryan to notice her the way she noticed him. The turning point came one evening when Ryan sent her a text message. They had exchanged numbers earlier when Emma had offered to help with one of the team events. The message was innocent at first, a simple question about the team fundraiser. But soon, their conversations moved beyond football. They began texting late into the night, sharing jokes, talking about their lives, and eventually, Ryan began to flirt. It was subtle at first, but soon his compliments became more personal. "You looked amazing today," one of his messages read. "I almost lost focus on the game." Emma's pulse quickened every time her phone buzzed with another message from him. She felt guilty, of course. She was a married woman, and this kind of attention shouldn't have felt so exhilarating. But it did. Michael had become distant, too wrapped up in his business struggles, and Emma felt neglected. Ryan, on the other hand, made her feel seen, wanted. One Friday after practice, Ryan made a bold move. As Emma was about to leave with Liam, Ryan approached her, his voice low and confident. "Hey, how about we grab a coffee sometime? You know, away from all this chaos, he said, gesturing toward the field. It'd be nice to talk without football in the background. Emma hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with all the reasons she should say no. But the thrill of it, the thought of spending time alone with Ryan, was too tempting to resist. She nodded, giving him a small smile. I'd like that, she replied softly. From that moment, their relationship crossed into something much more than just friendly chats at practice. They began meeting outside of football. Coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into secret meetings at out-of-the-way restaurants where no one knew them. Each time they met, Emma felt herself being pulled deeper into Ryan's world, a world of luxury, success, and excitement that Michael could never offer her. And as much as she hated to admit it, Emma didn't want to stop. The affair began innocently, or at least that's what Emma told herself. It was just a coffee here, a dinner there. Harmless, really. But deep down, she knew what was happening. Every time she met Ryan outside of football, it felt like a little secret they were keeping from the world, and from Michael. It didn't take long for those secret meetings to become more frequent. At first, they were simple. They met at quiet cafes far away from where anyone they knew might see them. Then, as the weeks passed, they started meeting at more extravagant places, out-of-town restaurants with exotic menus, where they could dine without the fear of being recognized. Emma found herself craving these moments with Ryan more and more. With him, she felt alive. She felt seen. It wasn't just the expensive restaurants or the thrill of sneaking around. It was the way Ryan looked at her, like she was the most important person in the room. In contrast, at home, Michael barely noticed her anymore, too consumed by the endless grind of his struggling business. Ryan, on the other hand, represented everything Emma thought she deserved. He was ambitious, successful, and treated her like a queen. He drove a luxurious car, always wore the latest designer suits, and his lifestyle was exactly what she had always envisioned for herself. Emma felt like she was getting a glimpse of the life she had always wanted, far from the financial struggles and compromises that defined her marriage. It wasn't long before Emma started lying to Michael. Small lies at first, easy to brush off. She told him her makeup and pedicure business had really taken off, and she was now going to clients' homes more frequently. It gave her an excuse to leave the house for hours on end, sometimes not coming back until late at night. I have another client today, she'd say casually over breakfast, her phone already buzzing with a new message from Ryan. It's great that business is picking up. Michael, exhausted from his long hours at work, nodded absent-mindedly, happy to believe that Emma had found a source of income. He was relieved that she wouldn't need to ask for expensive things anymore. Her own work could fund her growing tastes. But in reality, those late nights were spent in the dimly lit booths of exclusive restaurants, enjoying meals Michael could never afford. Each time she went out with Ryan, Emma convinced herself that she wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just dinner, after all. But deep down, she knew it wasn't innocent. The chemistry between her and Ryan had become undeniable. Their flirty texts had turned into hours-long conversations, and their coffee dates had become intimate dinners. Every touch of his hand, every lingering look, pulled her further away from the life she had with Michael. What made it worse was that Ryan didn't like Michael. He never said it directly, but Emma could sense the contempt in his tone whenever her husband's name came up in conversation. "You deserve so much more," Ryan would say, his hand lightly brushing hers across the table. "Michael can't give you what you need, not like I can." At first, Emma tried to defend her husband. After all, Michael wasn't a bad man. He was hardworking and dedicated to providing for their family, even if his business wasn't as successful as they had hoped. But the more time she spent with Ryan, the more she began to believe his words. Why should she settle for less when there was someone offering her so much more? Ryan's lifestyle was intoxicating. Every time they met, he introduced Emma to new experiences, a different cuisine, a new restaurant, or a lavish gift. He would surprise her with designer handbags or expensive jewelry, things Michael could never dream of affording. Emma wore them proudly, always hiding the truth when Michael asked how she had paid for such luxuries. "Oh, it was on sale," she'd say with a smile, slipping off the bracelet Ryan had gifted her before heading home. As the affair deepened, Emma found herself creating more elaborate lies to cover her tracks. She started telling Michael she was working later and later, even though she had no clients. On days when Liam had football practice, she would leave even earlier than usual, claiming she had errands to run before taking him to the field. In reality, she was meeting Ryan before practice, sneaking in a quick coffee or a secret conversation in his car. The secrecy thrilled her. There was something exhilarating about living a double life, being the perfect wife and mother on the surface while indulging in a forbidden romance behind the scenes. She was careful, always keeping her phone close, deleting messages and calls as soon as they were over, making sure there were no traces left behind for Michael to find. But as careful as she was, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of the lies growing heavier. The guilt gnawed at her late at night when she lay beside Michael in bed, his steady breathing the only sound in the dark room. She knew she was betraying him, but the pull of Ryan's world was too strong. The more she immersed herself in it, the harder it became to let go. One day, after an especially lavish lunch with Ryan at a Michelin-starred restaurant, Emma came home to find Michael sitting at the dining table, staring at an envelope in his hands. Her heart skipped a beat as she walked in, trying to maintain her composure. "What's that?" she asked casually, slipping her shoes off and placing her bag on the counter. Michael looked up, his eyes tired but unreadable. "It's just the bill for Liam's football lessons," he replied, setting the envelope down. "I didn't realize they'd increased the fees." Emma let out a quiet breath of relief. For a moment, she had feared that Michael had uncovered her secret. But he hadn't, at least, not yet. She smiled at him, brushing a hand over his shoulder as she walked past. "I'll help out with it," she said. "My business has been doing great lately, so I can cover some of the costs." Michael nodded, his gaze following her as she disappeared into the bedroom. He didn't question it. Why would he? Emma had always been good at keeping secrets. But little did she know, Michael's suspicions were growing. Michael sat in his home office, staring at the numbers on his computer screen, but none of it made sense. His mind wasn't on work, it was on Emma. For weeks now, something had been gnawing at him, a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. It wasn't just the mounting pressures of his business, it was Emma's behavior. At first, he had brushed it off as nothing. His wife had always been a bit demanding, wanting more than he could give, but lately, her absences had become harder to ignore. Emma's supposed makeup and pedicure business, which seemed to be booming overnight, didn't sit right with him. How could she have so many clients, especially when she rarely mentioned specifics? And then there were the new clothes, the jewelry, the luxury items she brought home. She always had an excuse: it was on sale or a client gave it to me. But it all seemed too convenient. The final straw came when he stumbled across a receipt. Michael had been cleaning up after dinner when a small slip of paper fell out of Emma's purse. He picked it up without thinking, only to realize it was from a high-end restaurant, one that was well out of their budget. The date on the receipt matched a day Emma had claimed she was working late with a client. The knot in his stomach tightened. Why would Emma lie? He wanted to ask her, confront her right then and there, but he hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if he was overreacting, and his suspicions were just a result of the stress from work? But then again, what if he wasn't? He tried to rationalize it, telling himself there was probably a simple explanation. Emma had never given him a reason not to trust her before. But still, something felt wrong. Her absences, the expensive gifts, and her secretive phone calls. All of it pointed to something bigger. And it wasn't just the material things. It was her attitude. She seemed happier when she was away, distant when she was with him. Michael's mind began to wander, and a painful question surfaced. Was she seeing someone else? The thought made his chest tighten. He pushed the idea away, not wanting to believe it. But the more he thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. Over the next few days, Michael became more observant. He started watching Emma closely, noticing the little things that had once escaped his attention. She always had her phone with her, even when she went to the bathroom. If it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly, then put it face down. She used to leave her phone lying around without a care, but now she guarded it as if it held her deepest secrets. He tried to peek at the screen once or twice, but she was always careful to lock it. One evening, while Emma was out working, Michael found himself pacing the living room. His gut told him something wasn't right, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed answers. He couldn't just sit by, pretending everything was fine while his marriage crumbled around him. He thought about asking her directly but feared she would deny it and grow even more secretive. Instead, he decided to take a more subtle approach. He remembered a conversation he'd had with a friend who had gone through something similar. His friend had mentioned using a GPS tracker to follow his wife's movements. Michael didn't want to believe it had come to that, but desperate for answers, he downloaded a tracking app to see where Emma was really going. The first few days brought no surprises. The app showed Emma going to familiar places: the grocery store, Liam's school, a couple of clients' homes. Michael began to feel guilty for spying on her. Maybe he was just being paranoid after all. Maybe his insecurities were getting the best of him. But on the fourth day, the app showed Emma at a location that didn't make sense: a restaurant on the other side of town, far from where her clients usually lived. Michael's heart raced as he stared at the screen. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had told him she was doing a makeup session for a bride-to-be, but there she was, at a high-end restaurant during the middle of the day. That night, Michael didn't say anything. He kept his emotions in check, watching Emma closely as she came home, smiling like everything was normal. She made small talk about her day, not mentioning the restaurant at all. His heart sank, and the suspicion that had been gnawing at him for weeks now felt like a certainty. Something was happening behind his back, and Emma was hiding it. But he still didn't have proof. Not the kind he needed to confront her and end this charade. He had to be sure. Michael began digging deeper. He checked their bank statements, looking for anything out of the ordinary, but Emma had always been careful with money, rarely using their joint account. Instead, she seemed to pay for everything in cash. The more he searched, the more frustrated he became. She was being too careful, covering her tracks in ways he hadn't expected. Then he had another idea: her phone. Emma never left it unattended, but there had to be a way to access it. One night, while she slept, Michael waited until she was in a deep slumber and quietly took her phone from the nightstand. His hands shook as he entered her passcode: Liam's birthday, something she hadn't bothered to change. He scrolled through her messages, but there was nothing suspicious. No text from anyone out of the ordinary. But then he remembered something his friend had said: people delete messages. Feeling like he was losing his mind, Michael checked her call history. Again, nothing unusual. But then, a name stood out: Ryan, the football coach. His stomach churned. Why would Emma be calling Ryan, especially late at night? It all clicked into place. The restaurant, the secretive behavior, and now Ryan. The man who seemed to have it all: the charm, the wealth, the success that Michael was struggling to achieve. It was him. Michael knew, in his gut, that Emma was seeing Ryan. As he put the phone back and lay beside Emma, pretending to sleep, he felt a deep sense of betrayal. The wife he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, was slipping away from him, and now he had to figure out what to do next. Michael couldn't take it anymore. The constant lies, the fake smiles, and Emma's growing distance weighed heavily on his heart. His suspicion had reached a boiling point, and he needed solid proof, something undeniable. The GPS tracking had confirmed some of his fears, but he still wasn't ready to confront her. Not without evidence. He had to be sure. One evening, while Emma was out yet again, claiming she had a late client, Michael decided to act. He had overheard Emma mention that she would be meeting Ryan the next day for something related to the football team. She had slipped it in casually, but it was enough for Michael to know where she would be. He had already seen Emma's schedule for the day, and the location she mentioned didn't match the restaurant she'd end up at. This was his chance. The next afternoon, Michael followed the GPS tracker, his heart pounding with every mile. The app led him to a high-end restaurant outside of town, well beyond where Emma's so-called clients lived. The sleek, elegant building stood in stark contrast to the life he and Emma were supposed to be living. His stomach twisted as he parked a few streets away, not wanting to be seen. He walked slowly, trying to prepare himself for what he might find. As he approached the restaurant, his worst fears came to life. Through the large glass windows, he spotted Emma sitting at a small, intimate table with Ryan. They were laughing, leaning in close to each other. Emma was wearing a new dress he had never seen before, one that looked far more expensive than anything they could afford. Ryan, as usual, looked impeccable in a tailored suit. It was the kind of scene you'd see in a magazine. Two people who belonged together in a world of wealth and charm. Except this wasn't a romantic movie. This was Michael's life falling apart. For a moment, he stood frozen, watching them. It was as if the world had stopped spinning. His mind raced with disbelief, pain, and rage all at once. There was no mistaking the way Emma was looking at Ryan, the same way she used to look at him. It wasn't just a friendly lunch. It was a betrayal unfolding right in front of him. Michael reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. His hands shook as he snapped a few photos from across the street. It felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life unravel. With each click, his chest grew heavier. The proof was now undeniable. He turned and walked away, unable to bear the sight of them any longer. As he headed back to his car, the anger hit him like a wave, but so did the sadness. Emma wasn't the woman he thought she was. The wife he had trusted, the mother of his child, was carrying on a secret life behind his back. Ryan had swept her into a world of wealth and luxury, and Emma had willingly followed. Michael sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside him. The reality was setting in, and it was unbearable. Everything he had worked for, the sacrifices, the late nights, the hopes for a better future, none of it had been enough for her. Emma wanted more, and she had found it in the arms of another man. For hours, Michael stayed in the car, unable to go home, unable to face what was waiting for him there. When he finally gathered the strength to drive back, he had a plan forming in his mind. The photos were enough. He now had the evidence. The confrontation was inevitable, but he wasn't ready for it tonight. He needed time. He needed to figure out how to handle the truth that his marriage was over. That night, Emma returned home late, as usual. She acted normal, walking in with a smile and a quick kiss on his cheek, just like she always did. But Michael could barely look at her. His heart ached with the weight of what he knew. As she chatted about her client, pretending her day had been filled with work, Michael remained silent, nodding occasionally but saying nothing of importance. He went to bed that night with the photos hidden in his phone and the growing certainty that everything was about to change. The lies, the secrecy, the betrayal, they had all come to a head. Now, all that remained was the confrontation, the final moment when everything would be laid bare. Michael closed his eyes, knowing that his world, his family, would never be the same again. Michael had barely slept that night, the weight of the photos on his phone like a ticking time bomb in his pocket. His mind kept replaying the image of Emma and Ryan at the restaurant, laughing, lost in each other's company. He didn't know how he'd get through the day, but he knew the confrontation had to happen. There was no turning back. The next evening, when Liam had gone to bed, Michael sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Emma. She was in their bedroom, getting ready for bed herself, still unaware of what was coming. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he clutched his phone, the damning photos staring back at him. The time had come to confront her. "Emma," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you come here for a minute?" She appeared in the doorway, wearing a soft smile that no longer meant anything to him. "What's up?" she asked, her tone casual, as if everything was normal between them. Michael took a deep breath, the tension tightening in his chest. "We need to talk." The seriousness in his voice made Emma pause. She walked slowly to the table, her smile fading. "What's going on?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he unlocked his phone and slid it across the table toward her. "Take a look." Emma's eyes shifted from Michael to the phone. Confused, she picked it up and glanced at the screen. The photos of her and Ryan, laughing together at the restaurant, were displayed in vivid clarity. Her face paled as the realization hit her. What is this?" she stammered, her hands shaking slightly as she set the phone down. "It's you," Michael said, his voice strained with the hurt and anger he had been holding back. "And Ryan, having a good time while you were supposedly at work. So tell me, Emma, how long has this been going on?" Emma's face turned ashen, and for a brief moment, she seemed lost for words. But then, just as quickly, she shifted into defense. "Michael, it's not what you think. We were just having lunch, that's all. Michael's patience snapped. Don't lie to me, Emma. I saw the way you looked at him. I've seen how you've been acting for weeks. The late nights, the secrecy, the expensive gifts. This isn't just a lunch. Emma flinched at the sharpness of his tone, but didn't back down. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, she said, her voice now trembling. It just happened. How could you do this to me? Michael asked, his voice cracking with pain. To us? To Liam? Do you even care about our family? Emma looked down at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of her actions finally caught up with her. Michael, I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. I've been so unhappy. Unhappy? Michael's voice was filled with disbelief. You've been unhappy, so you decided to cheat on me? With Ryan? A man who doesn't give a damn about our family? Tears now streamed down Emma's face, and she collapsed into a chair across from him. I didn't know how to tell you. Things have been so hard, and you've been so distant. I felt like I was alone in this marriage. Alone? Michael repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. Do you know how hard I've been working to keep this family together? To build something for us? And this is what you do. Emma wiped her tears, her hands trembling. I know I've made a mistake. I know I've hurt you. But it wasn't about you, Michael. It was about me. I needed something more. Something you couldn't give me. Michael stood up, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and betrayal. So you went to him? You went to Ryan because he has money, because he has everything I've been working so hard to give you? It wasn't just about money, Emma whispered, but even she knew how hollow that sounded. Then what was it, Emma? Michael shouted, his voice echoing through the quiet house. What could he give you that I couldn't? Emma sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I don't know, she choked out. I don't know, Michael. Everything felt so wrong. I needed an escape. Michael's anger began to shift to a deep, aching sadness. An escape from what? From me? From our life? I thought we were building something together, Emma. I thought we were a family. She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. I never meant to destroy us, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't want this to happen. I was just lost. Michael sat back down, his energy drained, the weight of the situation crashing over him. You've shattered my trust, Emma. I don't know if we can come back from this. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The house was filled with a deafening silence, broken only by Emma's soft sobs. Michael stared at the floor, feeling a hollow emptiness in his chest where his love for her once resided. He had thought their marriage could survive anything, but now, he wasn't so sure. After what felt like an eternity, Michael finally spoke, his voice low and broken. I don't know what to do anymore. Emma reached across the table, her fingers trembling as they brushed his hand. Michael, please. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please don't give up on us. He looked at her, his heart torn between the life they had built and the deep betrayal he now felt. I need time, he said quietly. Time to figure out if there's anything left to save. Emma nodded through her tears, but Michael knew things would never be the same. The trust had been shattered, and with it, the foundation of their marriage. The days that followed the confrontation felt like a blur for Michael. He couldn't focus on his work, couldn't find peace at home. Every time he looked at Emma, all he could see was her betrayal. Her pleas for forgiveness echoed through his mind, but he wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As the weight of his anger and sadness pressed down on him, a darker thought began to take hold. Why should he be the only one suffering? Why should Emma and Ryan be allowed to walk away unscathed, living their little secret life while he was left to pick up the pieces? He wanted revenge. He needed to make them feel the same hurt they had inflicted on him. Michael knew exactly how to start. If Emma could betray him with Ryan, then why couldn't he get his own revenge? And who better to help than Sarah, Ryan's wife? Sarah had always been kind to him at football games, standing by Ryan's side, completely unaware of the man her husband truly was. The more Michael thought about it, the more it seemed like the perfect way to strike back at Ryan. If Ryan could take his wife, then Michael would have no problem doing the same. One evening, Michael sent Sarah a casual message. He framed it as a concerned friend, asking if she wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something important. She agreed, sensing the seriousness in his tone. The next afternoon, they met at a small cafe, far from prying eyes. Sarah looked worried when she arrived, clearly sensing that something was wrong. Michael wasted no time. "I'm sorry to do this, Sarah," he began, his voice heavy with false concern. "But there's something you need to know about Ryan and Emma." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her mouth as she listened to Michael recount everything. Emma's affair with Ryan, the secret meetings, the lies. He showed her the photos, the same ones he had used to confront Emma. The devastation on Sarah's face was unmistakable. She had trusted Ryan, just as Michael had trusted Emma, and now both their worlds were crumbling. I can't believe this," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I had no idea." Michael reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "I didn't want to believe it either. But they've been lying to both of us. We deserve better than this." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and Michael could see the betrayal sinking in. He knew exactly how she felt, the same raw pain, the same sense of being blindsided by the people they loved. And just like him, Sarah didn't deserve it. But what came next wasn't just about helping Sarah. It was about revenge. He wanted Ryan to feel the same sense of betrayal, the same loss. He wanted to take something from Ryan, just as Ryan had taken from him. As the conversation continued, Michael subtly shifted the tone. He comforted Sarah, offering her a shoulder to cry on, listening to her vent her anger and confusion. And in those moments, the bond between them grew. The vulnerability they shared created a connection, a shared pain that pulled them closer together. Michael knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't long before their innocent meetings turned into something more. What had started as an act of revenge became a relationship of its own. Michael and Sarah began seeing each other more frequently, spending time together away from prying eyes, away from Emma and Ryan. At first, it was just to talk, to support each other through the nightmare of betrayal. But as time went on, the dynamic shifted. They began to rely on each other for comfort in ways that went beyond mere friendship. They didn't talk about their growing closeness. It didn't need to be said. Michael could see the way Sarah looked at him now, with something more than just sadness in her eyes. And he couldn't deny the satisfaction he felt every time he thought about how his actions would devastate Ryan when he found out. It was only a matter of time. It wasn't about love. Michael didn't love Sarah. This wasn't a romantic rebound. It was about making sure Ryan felt the same kind of gut-wrenching loss that he had inflicted on Michael. This was about justice, about revenge. One evening, after weeks of secret meetings, Sarah finally broke down in his arms, crying harder than ever. And in that moment, as he held her close, Michael felt the final piece of his plan fall into place. This was what he needed, to turn the tables on Ryan, to take something precious from him, just as Ryan had taken from him. Michael kissed Sarah then, softly, but with a purpose, and she kissed him back, her emotions raw and unguarded. It wasn't passion that fueled their connection. It was shared pain, shared betrayal. They had been torn apart by the people they loved, and now they were finding solace in each other. For the first time since the betrayal, Michael felt a sense of control. He had his revenge, and it tasted sweeter than he had imagined. But as he walked back to his car that night, leaving Sarah behind, a new thought crept into his mind. What would come next? He had won this battle, but at what cost? And more importantly, how much damage would be left in his wake when Ryan and Emma finally realized what he had done? The fallout was inevitable. In a matter of weeks, everything began to unravel, just as Michael had anticipated. And yet, it felt more chaotic than even he had prepared for. The delicate balance he had tried to maintain between vengeance and his own emotions was tipping faster than he could control. Ryan found out about Michael and Sarah sooner than expected. It started with whispers, small-town gossip that spread like wildfire. Michael could see the storm brewing the moment Ryan showed up at Liam's next football practice, his jaw clenched and his eyes burning with anger. Ryan's easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced with fury barely held in check. He didn't confront Michael outright, not in front of the other parents, but the tension between them was palpable. Later that evening, Michael received the inevitable phone call from Ryan. His voice was tight with rage. What are you doing with my wife? Ryan demanded, the accusation heavy with disbelief. Michael stayed calm, though the satisfaction in his chest swelled. You should have thought about that before you decided to start something with mine. The line went silent for a moment, and Michael could practically hear Ryan's frustration building. This isn't over, Michael, Ryan growled. You think you can play this game and get away with it? You have no idea what's coming. But Michael wasn't intimidated. He had waited for this moment. Ryan's fury, his sense of losing control, just like Michael had felt when he first discovered the affair. That night, the confrontation extended beyond the phone. Emma and Ryan had their own explosive argument, one that Michael could hear from the other side of the house. When Emma found out what Michael had done with Sarah, she was livid. You're no better than me, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. You've destroyed us, Michael. Michael stood his ground, his voice cold and detached. I'm not the one who started this, Emma. You did. I'm just finishing it. But even as he said the words, Michael felt the weight of them. He had wanted revenge, and he had gotten it. But now the reality was sinking in. Their marriage was in ruins, and not just because of Emma's affair with Ryan, but because of what it had turned both of them into. The love they had once shared had been poisoned, and there was no going back. Emma, who had once been so sure of her path with Ryan, now found herself adrift. Ryan had been furious when he found out about Michael and Sarah, and in a fit of anger, he had broken things off with her. He didn't want the complications anymore, didn't want to deal with the mess they had all created. And just like that, Emma was left with nothing. Michael watched as the woman he had once loved fell apart in front of him. She had believed that her affair with Ryan was her ticket to a better life, but now she was seeing the full cost of her actions. She had betrayed her husband, lost her lover, and broken the family they had built together. The realization hit her hard, and for the first time since this all began, Emma seemed truly remorseful. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered one night, sitting at the edge of their bed. I thought I was doing what was best for me, but I was wrong. Michael looked at her, feeling a mixture of pity and anger. He didn't know if he could ever forgive her, and frankly, he wasn't sure if he even wanted to. The damage was done. As for Sarah, things were complicated. What had started as a calculated move for revenge had spiraled into something more. Michael had developed feelings for her, or at least something close to it. Their shared pain had brought them together, and now that the dust had settled, they were left wondering what their relationship really was. Ryan had tried to reconcile with Sarah, pleading for her forgiveness, but it was too late. She had seen the real Ryan, the man who could betray her without a second thought. Sarah was done with him, and she made it clear that their marriage was over. She wasn't going back to a man who had lied to her, just as Michael wasn't going back to Emma. But Michael and Sarah's relationship wasn't the fresh start either of them had hoped for. It was born from pain and betrayal, and as much as they cared for each other, they couldn't escape the darkness of their pasts. The foundation of their bond was built on the ashes of two broken marriages, and that wasn't something they could easily forget. Michael found himself wondering if revenge had really been worth it. Yes, he had made Ryan pay for what he had done, but in the process, he had lost so much of himself. The man he had become, cold, calculating, and driven by anger, wasn't the man he wanted to be. In the end, no one came out of the situation unscathed. Emma moved out, her relationship with Liam strained by the upheaval in their lives. Michael and Sarah's connection, once fueled by shared pain, began to fizzle out as they realized the depth of the wounds they were carrying. And Ryan? He was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own choices, his arrogance and selfishness finally catching up with him. He lost his wife, his affair, and any respect he had once commanded in their tight-knit community. As for Michael, the revenge had been sweet at first, but now, standing in the ruins of his marriage and the shattered lives of those around him, he wondered if it had been worth the cost. Months had passed since the fallout, and the dust had begun to settle. The tension, the fights, and the whirlwind of emotions had finally quieted, leaving behind a kind of numbness in its wake. Michael, who had once been consumed by rage and a thirst for revenge, now found himself staring at the life he had left. It was nothing like what he had imagined. Emma had moved out of the house, taking only the essentials. They had agreed to share custody of Liam, but the once happy, carefree child now seemed distant and withdrawn. The cheerful boy who had loved football practices was quieter, his innocence stolen by the unraveling of his parents' marriage. Michael hated that Liam had been caught in the middle of all this. Michael's relationship with Sarah had slowly fizzled out. What had once been an intense bond of shared pain had withered in the light of reality. They had both been using each other as a means to escape, but once the passion of revenge faded, there wasn't much left between them. Sarah moved on, leaving the town behind to start a new life, far from the memories of Ryan's betrayal. For a while, Michael found himself going through the motions of life, unsure of where to go from here. His business was stable, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. Every day felt like a blur, a mix of regret, guilt, and a faint longing for what once was. But one evening, something unexpected happened. Emma called. It was late, and Michael was surprised to see her name flash on his phone. They hadn't spoken much beyond logistics for Liam, and he hadn't expected to hear from her otherwise. When he answered, Emma's voice was soft, hesitant. "Michael," she began, "I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me, but can we talk?" Michael's first instinct was to refuse. What was there left to say? But something in her voice made him pause. He agreed to meet her the next day at a small park where they used to take Liam when he was younger. It was neutral ground, a place filled with memories of better times. When they met, Emma looked different. She wasn't the polished, put-together woman who had been obsessed with designer clothes and luxury. She looked more grounded, more real, as if the weight of everything had finally sunk in. They sat on a park bench, the awkward silence between them heavy. "I've done a lot of thinking," Emma began, her eyes fixed on the ground. "About everything. About what I did, what we've both done. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to explain why I did what I did." Michael remained silent, his arms crossed, waiting for her to continue. "I was selfish," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I wanted things I thought would make me happy. Money, success, attention. I thought Ryan was the answer to all of that. But I was wrong. He was never the answer. I didn't realize what I had until I destroyed it." Michael felt a surge of anger flare up, but it was different now, duller, like an old wound that had long since scarred over. He'd heard enough apologies, enough regrets, to know that nothing would change the past. But still, he listened. "I was wrong to betray you," Emma continued, her voice cracking. "I hurt you, and I hurt Liam, and I hate myself for that. But I also realized something else." She looked up at him now, her eyes filled with an honesty Michael hadn't seen in a long time. "I didn't destroy our marriage on my own, Michael. We both played a part in it." Michael's jaw tightened. He didn't want to believe it. He had been the victim, the one who was cheated on. But deep down, he knew there was some truth to her words. His long hours at work, his growing distance, his inability to see how unhappy she had been. It had all contributed to the widening gap between them. "What are you trying to say, Emma?" he asked, his voice steady but tired. "I'm saying that maybe we weren't ready for what life threw at us," she said quietly. "Maybe we got lost in trying to be something we're not. But I also know this. I still care about you, Michael. And I still believe there's something worth saving." Michael stared at her, stunned. He hadn't expected this. Emma was talking about saving their relationship after everything they had been through, after the lies, the betrayal, the revenge. Emma's next words caught him off guard. "I'm not asking for a second chance right away. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I'm willing to try. I'm willing to work on myself and prove to you that I can be better." For the first time in months, Michael didn't feel anger when he looked at her. He didn't feel that sharp, bitter resentment. Instead, he felt something unexpected, relief. Maybe it was the fact that she was finally taking responsibility. Or maybe it was the fact that, deep down, despite everything, part of him still cared about her too. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Emma," Michael said, his voice softer now. "I don't know if I can forget what you did. But maybe we can start fresh. Not as a couple, but as people. Maybe we can rebuild some kind of trust." Emma nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "That's all I'm asking for." In that moment, something shifted. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define the future either. Michael realized that revenge hadn't brought him the closure he wanted. It had only deepened his pain. But maybe, just maybe, starting over, slowly, cautiously, was the real twist in this story. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in a long time, Michael felt a glimmer of hope, not for a perfect ending, but for something better than the ruins they had both created.